everybody, I'm Pia from Stitches and Scraps, and today we're talking about puff stitches. A puff stitch is not the same as a bobble or a cluster. I should have separate tutorials for those soon. But basically what it is we're going to be pulling up a whole bunch of loops all to the same height, and then we're going to draw the yarn through them all at once. So let's look at how that happens. I'm going to leave a space so you can see the puff stitch a little more clearly. So I'm going to chain one and skip this stitch. Now to do the puff stitch, you start just like you would for a double crochet. You yarn over, insert your hook into the next stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. So now I have 2 loops on my hook, and I'm going to wiggle these a little bit till they're all up at the same height of where I'm working, so that I've got basically 3 loops on my hook all at the same level. Now I'm going to do the same thing again. Yarn over, insert my hook into that same stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then wiggle it up till it's all the same height. Now I have 5 on my hook. Every time I do this, I'm going to get 2 more. So for this puff, I'm going to do it 6 times and end up with 13 loops on my hook. So I've got 5 loops on my hook. There's 6 loops, 7 loops. Okay. There's the yarn over is 8 loops. Pull up a hook, pull up a loop. That's 9 loops. Yarn over is 10 loops. Pull up a loop for 11, and then the last time, yarn over, insert my hook, pull up a loop. So you can already see this is looking kind of puffy. And it's important to get all of these at about the same height. It gets tighter down at the end here, and there's a tendency to let your puff lean like this. So you want to make sure that you're pulling these all up till they're all about the same height. Then yarn over and pull through all of them at once. You will get a much more consistent puff if you pull through all of them in one go like that. If you try to pull through just a few at a time, you're going to end up with a wonky looking puff just because of the way the tension goes. So if I do 2 or 3, and then I do another 2 or 3, and then I do another 2 or 3, well, that one actually turned out okay, but it's harder to get it looking nice if you do it that way. Most people will do it that way when they start, but it's better to do it all at once you get to that point. Now, I always like, technically this is the puff stitch, it's done. You can go on to your next stitch, but I always like to close my puffs with a chain that I don't count as anything other than the top of the puff, because that gives me a nice top to work into right there. And because I just feel it looks more finished. The pattern you're working will specify whether or not to close it with a chain, and it can make a difference. So always do whatever the pattern says, unless you want to modify it. Now I'm leaving another gap just so that I can show you what this looks like, and I'm going to finish some double crochets here. Okay, so there we have a puff stitch. It's all nice and soft and puffy, and I've got a nice top to work into, and that's how you do the basic puff stitch. One thing I like to do with puff stitches is I like to float them. I like to put them on chain, on big long chains so that they look like beads floating in the middle of the chain. So I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to chain 1, 2, 3. Now this chain, the first one we made, the farthest one from the hook, that one is just my spacer, just to give me room, just like this one did here. This chain here, the second one from the hook, is the one that I'm actually going to work into. And this third chain just brings me up a little bit with my loop, and also gives me the room to twist and turn around a little bit. So that's where the 3 chains are. Now I'm going to work into this chain, and I like to work into the back bar of the chain, which is back here, this part right here. So I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook into that back bar, and pull up a loop, and then wiggle it all to the same height. Now the reason I like working in the back bar is you see it leaves me that little V on the front side. So I think it's a nice, neat look that mirrors what the top of it is going to look like. So that's what I choose to do. You can work into that chain any way that you like to work into chains. So I've got 3, and for this one I'm doing a smaller one. I'm only going to do 7 loops on my hook. So there's 5, and then this makes 7, and be sure you're wiggling it a little bit to get the height that you want. Now yarn over, and I'm going to pull through all 7, and notice I'm holding this open by pinching it here. That helps me to pull through everything in one swift movement. Chain to close it, and then I left a 1 chain space here, so I'm going to leave another 1 chain space there. So now I have a puff stitch, kind of wonky looking puff stitch. There we go. I have a puff stitch that's floating around in the middle of this chain. It looks kind of like a bead on the chain. If I continue working across my row, and I can make, I can make a much larger chain of puff stitches all the way up, but if I continue working across my row, what's going to happen is this is going to lie down sideways. So I'm going to suggest that's about 2 stitches wide. So I've got 1 chain here, 1 chain here, and 2 stitches in the middle. So I'm going to skip 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm going to start working just my double crochets like I was back over here to anchor that and finish the row. And then you'll see how that lays down just like that. So that works great if you want a chain of beads, for example, for my dewdrop necklace, or if you want just to float a bead to make it look pretty. I'm going to have a shawl pattern coming out very soon that's going to be a crochet along that has these beads in it. So I call it a bead. It's just a puff stitch. And this is what it looks like if you work it in line with your crochet. So those are puff stitches, and couple of notes. The height of the stitch before you start the puff determines the height of the puff. So if you're working treble crochets, your puff is going to be taller, taller stitches, your puff is going to be taller. Single crochets, you'll get a tiny little puff that's hardly noticeable. The width of your puff and how puffy it is determined by how many loops. You can see that this puff is not as puffy as this puff. So you can control the width by how many loops you pull up. You can control the height by where you start with your hook. And that's pretty much all there is to puffs.